life is complicated, but AZ Central is here to help find answers, to help solve problems, to make your life better. We're here to help.
Yeah, I got things to do. I can't stand around all day waiting because these guys can't do their job.
Do you think this is a national issue or an Arizona issue?
Probably an Arizona issue.
So immediately, what were your thoughts when you walked up?
That'd be huge. That'd be great. I can't leave.
It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Okay, there you go. Thanks,
Where are they redirecting you now?
They just give you a list and tell you to go to some place.
Where do they send you to?
God, there's places in Mesa and some places. I got things to do. I can't stand around all morning trying to find a place to vote.
The last couple hours I've been waiting to vote in this tremendously long line.
I waited for about 2 hours, a little over 2 hours.
Oh, well, I figure everyone's actually just trying to make a difference here. You know, everyone's coming to vote. They're willing to wait this long in a line, so it's actually kind of inspiring for myself. I wanted to leave, but I was like, hey, it's my one shot.
I'm a first-time voter. I'm a freshman. I just thought it'd be really good to come out here and make sure that I'm doing my part in society and voting, making a change as the next generation. Honestly, I really do think that people coming out and voting for what they believe in, voting for a change in what's going on now in the world is really important.
Of them won't be counted tonight because they were early ballots that were turned in too late to verify or provisional. So that would get us in the range of approaching, if not exceeding, a 60% turnout, which is huge.
Big for a midterm. And the Democrats had seemed to have closed a little bit of the registration gap, but what are you seeing on Election Day?
I think Republicans would have been quite happy with the turnout gap as it turned out. It is true that it's less than is traditional in a midterm election, but it matches or exceeds what is traditional in a presidential election. And Republicans do fine in the presidential election cycles as well.
But you would also
Up
think
until-
that election day, if the blue wave was going to manifest, that you'd see more Democratic votes coming in, or?
I had anticipated that the 500 to 700,000 same-day ballots would trend more strongly towards the Democrats than the early ballots. The Republicans have 116,000 vote advantage in the early ballots, and I expected that to maybe narrow. Maricopa County results up till about 6 o'clock, 6:30, had Republicans up 9 percentage points over Democrats. Independent turnout was up a bit, and Democratic voters tend to be after-work voters.
So they're in line now in Tempe and ASU.
Yeah, so I think you may see that narrow, but certainly it does not. And Maricopa County is 65% of the statewide vote. So if Republicans are holding their own or better than that in same-day voting in Maricopa County, that suggests that the blue wave isn't going to wash out Republicans up and down the ticket. It makes Democrats dependent upon winning the independent vote by a large margin, and the independent vote isn't turning out very strongly, or getting an unusually large crossover vote from Republicans. With the Trump effect, that was thought possible this election, and we'll see as the votes get counted whether it was, but it's a tall hurdle.
Yeah, and we have a small sample of independent voters here. One reason we're talking about turnout rather than results is we haven't had results yet. Polls closed at 7, and results were supposed to come in the 8 o'clock hour. It is the 8 o'clock hour, but we're going to start seeing those results soon, and as races get called, we will let you know when we find out. We have independent voters who were nice enough to join us to talk about what's going on and give me a chance to sit down. Yay. Sophia, Tim, Kenneth, did you vote early or did you vote today? We'll start with you, Sophia. Why did you vote earlier today, and why?
I voted very early. I didn't go the first day, but I went like the second or third day in because I like to beat the lines, and I also like time to think about what I'm going to do and not feel like rushed at the polls on election day. So I like to have it kind of pre-thought out and take my time, so I go early.
Yeah, sit at the kitchen table, hopefully with the AZ Central Voter Guide at your side.
Yep.
Tim, did you vote early or did you vote today?
I did. I did the mail-in vote, so several weeks ago. So if you quiz me on things that are going on now, I've already forgotten. It was so long ago. But
right, and it makes the phone calls stop. It makes the mailing stop.
You know what? Yeah, every ad that I saw after it, I thought, this is a waste of their money.
Yeah.
Oh, every television ad you saw.
And every Facebook ad that would come up like, you're wasting your money. I've already voted. You need to move on to someone else.
Kenneth, did you vote today or did you vote early?
Permanent early ballot. I always try to vote ahead because I know exactly how long that line gets. Also, to circle back, we independents, we're a third statewide of the demographic. We will flip the state red or blue depending upon how we turn out. And that's something that the parties need to realize. They need to leverage us and include us in connecting.
I think there's a challenge, and we'll have our experts discuss this, I guess, but it's hard to reach you. Like, because you're not part of a party, they don't know how to reach you. They have to use television. They have to use mass mailings.
Yeah, but television's the thing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's also interesting, just like about election coverage in general, because election coverage in general is so like this or that, and it's missing, like if in Arizona, it's missing like 1/3 of the people voting, you know, and I think on all levels, it's just easier. It's easier to say there's only 2 teams, but I don't know how accurate that is right now in today's culture and today's voting culture, like starting really from 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we'll see how well they did in reaching independence. We'll ask our columnists. We have results.
Someone needs to talk about that, yeah.
What are we seeing?
Phil, go ahead.
Take it away, Phil.
So we've got about 1% of precincts reporting.
That's
so
all we
that's a
need.
very small sample size, but I think the most interesting result I see on there is Secretary of State. And there, Katie Hobbs is winning 3-1 the votes in the first percentage to come in. That's a huge lead over Steve Gaynor. You got to wonder if that's going to hold through the night. It's very early, but
right. But we're talking about 1 million votes cast. But right.
I think there's something wrong with these numbers. Some of these results make no sense.
That 1% would result in 1 million
well,
votes?
Well, no. The first votes that come in are early ballot votes from all over the state. So it would not be unusual. At some point in time, we're going to have 1.6 million votes that are counted. But these lopsided numbers just don't make any sense. If you go to the state treasurer race, you have the Democrat, even though Republicans in the early ballots lead Democrats by 116,000 votes, you have the Democrat running away with it. So, I mean, I'll watch it turn out to be accurate.
Right, but
and so much for my expertise, but this doesn't pass the smell test.
1%, it's hard to know. We haven't gotten any calls yet from. We haven't gotten any calls yet from the.
Does it sound right only because the Democrats are winning here?
Well, no, I don't believe that Ducey's going to win nearly as big as he's winning, and you did have money invested in the Secretary of State's race, the Attorney General's race. There was no money invested in the state treasurer's race. So in an electorate that's that lopsidedly Democrat in a low visibility race without a whole lot of money, for the Democrat to win 74% of the vote would be highly unusual, shall we say.
It did seem like what we were going to get, the first batch of results were going to be a lot of the early votes. So I thought initially it would be more than 1%. Well, I guess instead of what we're seeing, what do you expect to see tonight? What kind of results do you expect to see tonight?
Ed? I think it's dangerous to have expectations. I think you celebrate the day.
But you've already written the column, so.
No, I think it's dangerous. I mean, I think ultimately, you know, what Bob said is probably true. You can't trust early numbers, and expectations are just that. They're kind of meaningless at this stage now that everything's already been cast. And now you just wait and deal with it as it comes.
The Secretary of State's numbers guru says, stand by, there is an issue with the results page with some of the contests.
We will stand by and we see that we have an issue with the results page. But it's fun to speculate about the 1%.
I think it's the Russians. But you really...
the Montini has the news. The Russians have hacked the Arizona Secretary. You've heard it here. This is the kind of journalism you get at AZ Central. All right, there's no evidence the Russians have hacked.
We're laughing, but you never know. I mean, seriously, in this day and age where, you know, we have seen this before, so I'm not smiling.
But we do have a temporary glitch. Phil, have you pre-written the editorials? What are you expecting to see out of this?
Well, there are some expectations. I think there's a strong expectation that Doug Ducey is going to win big tonight. It's kind of the buzz out there in the community. It's sort of what the polling has been picking up. You don't feel the kind of energy in the Garcia campaign that you've seen in other major races in other states. And so I think that's an expectation, and I'm always ready to be surprised. So that's one. I think also Congress 8. I think in Congress 8, Hiral Tipirneni, who is really a spectacular candidate, is probably going to go down and lose by a sizable margin. That is an expectation that has been growing over the last few days. So.
Oh, a sizable margin. She came close in the special election, but you think?
Yeah, it'll be a larger margin.
Speaking of the Garcia campaign, Channel 12's shows are filmed in this building as well, and on that show, you said Garcia's campaign was like?
Worst campaign ever. I do not understand. And in a way, he did the same thing that Martha McSally did, only going the opposite way. Martha McSally had to go very far to the right in order to win her primary. David Garcia did not have to go so far to the left to win his primary, and yet he chose to do so, and he chose to stay out there. Instead of talking education, 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 he's running down to New Orleans to talk about imagine no wall at the border, essentially writing the Republican Governors Association's campaign ads for them. Talking about getting rid of ICE. There was just no reason to go there, and yet he chose to do that. He staked out a claim far to the left, whereas Kyrsten Sinema decided this was an election where we needed to go for independent voters and those moderate Republican women that you can pick off because they don't like Trump, get them to come over. One of them has a really good shot at winning an election tonight, and the other one's going to be blown out.
Except that Garcia didn't really have a choice, you know, compared to the other candidates. I
Why?
agree
Sure he
with
did.
you.
Why?
No, he didn't, because he was completely alone from the beginning. No help from the Democratic Party,
But
from
why?
national and
But why did he have none of those things? Because he ran a terrible campaign.
Well, we didn't know that at the beginning, and from the beginning he didn't have any help from anyone. So I think he essentially said, oh, may as well, I'm going to go to the left and see if I can incentivize Latinos and millennials and the radicals, essentially, because he really didn't have any money. No one was supporting him from the establishment. So what is there left to do except, like, I'm just going to try anything?
But don't you think that they would have supported him had he been able to run a credible campaign toward the middle, much like he did when he ran for Secretary of State 4 years ago?
Or Superintendent of Public Instruction, yeah. I do wonder, too, had he run, he chose not to run clean, which, had he run clean, would have given him a bag of money, at least for some commercials, and I don't know if that hurt him in not being able to have television at the end.
Well, think of what he gave up, because when he ran 4 years ago for Superintendent of Public Instruction, he won Maricopa County. So he won the Republican Maricopa County against Diane Douglas. And he could have banked that and really built up, you know, and established that he was a centrist in Arizona, which is the way Democrats need to win if they, or need to run if they want to win in statewide offices in Arizona. At least move toward the center or center left instead of going so far left. When he went to the left, he gave all that up, all the bona fides that he had built up running in that prior race.
I agree, it was a total disaster, you know, in terms of a campaign. I think he decided over a weekend, you know, during the Red for Ed movement, you know, started talking about it on a Friday night. I think I'm going to run for governor. By Sunday of the same weekend, he decided that he was going to go for it without, you know, talking to consultants. That's a problem, you know, without talking to the base, without talking to the political parties. So it was a disaster from the beginning.
He also got snookered a little bit by Governor Ducey, who is, you know, he's the quintessential politician. When the teachers were revolting and actually hitting the streets, Governor Ducey runs to the front of the parade with a 20 by 20 education plan that gave them raises. It's very difficult to run and say he's anti-education when teachers are getting a 10% raise. So I think, in a way, he just kind of got outmaneuvered from the get-go.
Well, let's face it, he was a sacrificial lamb here.
Worst campaign ever.
Was there a path for Garcia? And I think his plan strategically was to pick out the Latino vote and to energize the young vote. Is there a path? Was there a path ever there?
I think there was a path for a Democrat. I don't think that the Democrat could run on Bernie Sanders' platform and win a statewide race, since Bernie Sanders couldn't win a Democratic primary on Bernie Sanders' platform. But I do believe that if you had a Democratic candidate who ran on a specific proposal to restore K-12 education funding, which would require saying, here's a specific tax increase. I support the specific tax increase. If you elect me, I will lead an effort to get it enacted. I think there was a chance for a Democrat to win on the education issue this cycle. Garcia was otherwise too out of step with the state and never was specific about how he would restore funding for education. The numbers are now fixed.
Good. I saw. It looked like the bar graph was a little better.
Yeah,
so
and for instance, Yee is now up with 57% of the vote. Right now, with roughly 900,000 votes counted, which is about half the early ballots, Republicans are leading in all races.
All statewide races.
All statewide races. McSally is also slightly up, but that one is nip and tuck.
Superintendent of public instruction, right? Or am I looking
Oh,
at that?
it just flipped.
Okay.
It just flipped.
You're right.
So that one looks nip.
I still see Kathy.
Yeah,
and that was
Riggs up there. Yeah, and these will, they say it's going to automatically refresh. But yeah, whatever the glitch was seems to have been fixed. And now we're seeing at least some closer results. Gaynor and Hobbs is still very close. Is that unexpected? Is that what we thought? How did Gaynor do in the editorial board interviews?
Well, Gaynor's problem is that he's an enigma, that he is a man running for an office that would be next in line for governor. And if he were to win that office and suddenly become governor, we'd have a stranger in leading this state because we don't know him. You know, he's a businessman who's quite accomplished, has quite an education, a Harvard degree, has been successful, but he's unfamiliar in this state, and that was one of his problems. The other was articulating who he is. We had some trouble trying to get out of him just who he is as a person and what he believes. There were moments in our editorial board interviews when it was like pulling teeth. It was so difficult to get information that we wanted to understand him.
Right, so he's second in line, his first run of political office. We don't know much about him. Let's ask our independent voters. What did candidates say that resonated with you? I don't want you to disclose who you voted for unless you feel like it. The messages you were hearing that seemed to resonate with you and work this time around.
Sure. I mean, and that is something that is a new strategy, though. A lot of politicians, actually the last two go-arounds, and I think actually Trump is the one that taught people this, to not say anything really specific, you know, and to allow people to then decide what that means, you know. So I think that we saw that a lot too, even with ours, like with McSally and Cinema not really wanting to debate or really say anything until their feet were really held to the fire, you know. And like, so yeah, you didn't really get a lot of like policy information or anything. So we had to dig. I went and looked at like govtrack.com, and there's other.
What were you looking for? How well?
What are their voting records?
Voting for or against Trump.
Right, and it's not even about Trump per se, but I mean, it's like, how do they vote on immigration? How do they vote on tax cuts? How do they vote on environmental things? You know, it's like, because they say one thing, but their voting record will tell you what they really did, and that's what I.
Tim, what did you look for? Did the ads have any effect, or how did you look at who to vote for in this race?
Well, just a quick story. I was asking my daughters about it, and for governor, for example, and they said, well, this guy was a superintendent, part of the schools, and this guy ran Cold Stone Creamery, and they lit up at that one. So yeah, the Cold Stone connection, yeah, the ice cream connection really worked well for them. What I typically, well, for the Cinema and the McSally race, I looked at their record and thought, okay, how does this person relate to me? In what ways are they like me? In what ways do they vote like me? And then I also thought, you know, once you bring them up onto a national stage, how much punch do they pack? Because once they represent Arizona, they represent all of us, and then it's kind of how much clout do they bring with it. So, for example, when I lived in New York, Hillary Clinton was my senator. We disagreed on a lot of things, but she brought a lot of punch because of her connections and everything like that. So I thought very strongly, which one of these two people is going to fit on a national stage and is going to be great for Arizona on a national stage.
And Kenneth, what struck you this cycle? How did you decide?
Well, how we gather information. Traditional ads, I don't pay any mind to them. None at all, because a lot of it's mud, and I don't need that. I need to know what you're going to do once you're in that office. And a lot of that is going to be driven on human rights. Are you going to support my communities that I connect to? Transgender, other LGBT communities, minorities, people of color.
So what, did you look at
Lots
voting
of
records, or did
voting
you
records
look at interviews?
were key. What they said, if I could actually meet them shake their hand, ask them questions. I was able to do that with one candidate in the primaries, Deidre Boot. She wasn't my candidate at the after the primary, of course, but I knew where my loyalty lied at that point.
Because she just reached out to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because she took the time to put out there what she was going to do when she was in office. She was straight with me. And she didn't win, unfortunately, but that's what I look for.
You didn't have a chance to cast a vote in the general.
I know.
The ads. I may be the only person who's going to miss the political ads. They seem to be, I kind of relish in the deep voice. I love the language of the ads.
The music.
The music.
Plus, he's great for the local
black and white.
economy. He's great for the local economy
Yes.
that we were talking about.
Every television station. Channel 12 tweeted today at 3 o'clock when they aired the last political ad. But if everything goes south, I want to get a job as the deep voice narrator that says, you know,
I have to wonder, though, if some of those Martha McSally ads, again, the people that you're after, moderate Republican women, independents, I have to wonder if the fact that she never really moderated her tone, it was attack, attack, attack from day one till the end of the campaign, if that will play against her in what is going to be a close race, if that might have made all the difference.
Some of the issues that came up, as we still wait for some results, some of the issues that came up towards the beginning of the cycle, Red for Ed, I don't know whether, do you think that is holding up as an issue? The walkout?
I think what Bob said was correct. I think a smart Democrat would have run on education and just emphasized it again and again and again and stayed away from all the rest of the stuff, called the border stuff distraction, and dealt exclusively with that, because you're going to get those people that you're really looking for, parents who are concerned more about that than anything else. And they didn't. A lot of them didn't. And it hasn't become as big an issue as it once. And I would have played off, I mean, the whole notion of the 20 for 2020 stuff. Right. I'd have blown that off. I'd have called that a political stunt and said, you know, the real money is going to require more than this. This doesn't come close to catching up what we need to catch up to, and really gone for it. And that, if David Garcia had done that, I think that would have been really effective.
Yeah, however, if you're looking at the numbers, just at the sheer numbers here, so Ducey is winning by 211,000 votes, and so Garcia has 493,000 so far with no money. And mind you, that Ducey spent like $17 million, so the Red for Ed has to be there somewhere.
Oh yeah, I think the people were there. You could have really energized them so much more by playing to their base.
I think where the Democrats lost some of these races, and I don't think that Red for Ed came through on the promise of changing the state. I think that you're going to find a Republican-controlled Senate at the end of the day and a Republican-controlled House, and that to me is where the key races were for them, because that's where the budget and those priorities are made. But where they lost the whole thing is when Invest in Ed was thrown off the ballot.
Right, had Invest in Ed stayed, we would still be talking about education funding, even if it was to not support that proposal.
Right, because the way it is, the Republican candidates for the legislature advertised themselves as champions of public education, and it was fair in that, yes, they did vote for a budget that gave teachers 10% pay raises, but it was unfair and misleading in that they've voted for 10 years to starve the public schools. But of course, as I said, Ducey is a master politician, and he knew to get in front of that issue, and he blunted the Democrats before they even really got started.
Yeah, and I guess it's strange. We start thinking towards the end of the year about what were the biggest stories of the year, and one of them just has to be that there were tens of thousands of teachers marching down to the Capitol and shut down the schools across the state for about a week.
And again, if you look at the entire election, what's going to have the most impact on the state, it could be Proposition 305. I mean, that could end up having an enormous impact on the state if you open up the voucher system to every kid in the whole state.
And I think that is going to go down big time. Now, Proposition 305 is the voucher thing. It's basically, basically what you're going to see is you're going to see the voters veto our legislature and our governor's voucher plan, universal voucher plan.
But you also think those same voters will put those same lawmakers back into power.
That's exactly right. And what's interesting about that is that knowing that, if in fact it does go down,
well, it is going down by 67%
That's great.
now.
Yeah, that's a really great thing. And that tells you in and of itself that if there was a Democratic candidate who had really played that issue, you could have harvested some of that energy right for that and maybe done yourself some real good.
The other issue that, I mean, as education sort of came and sort of has faded in this cycle, immigration became a major issue. I hear Diana Nanez calling a race in the newsroom. She'll be over here to tell us what it was. But immigration became a major issue. What did you make of this last-minute closing argument by Trump about the caravan?
Well, I think the election became hyper-nationalized. I think that's why we're seeing the numbers, why we look like we're on our way to 60% turnout, which is really high. Normally, midterm elections in Arizona are around 45%, 50% turnout. So this is going to be high. And it's been hyper-nationalized, not only by Trump, but by the Democrats as well, with the talk of the blue wave and let's create divided government and the check against Donald Trump. And I think Trump, of course, goes to his fail-safe issue, which is immigration. He went right back to it and closed with it, and that obviously resonates in Arizona. So.
Well, that's the thing, like he's saying it, he's across the other states. Does it resonate? In Arizona, we should be familiar with the immigration issue.
He resonates with his base, you know, the core voters, those that he wanted to get out for Martha McSally and other states. He didn't talk about anything else but immigration in the 11 rallies that he had in the past 2 weeks, and build a wall, you know, the caravan and the terrorists, you know, hiding there. So clearly he thought it would resonate with those folks, and I think it did. Now, are they going to vote? I mean, did they? We're about to find out.
Well, they clearly did not want to talk about health care because the Affordable Care Act has grown on a number of people, especially some of the more popular provisions of it, including the protection for people with pre-existing conditions. And of course, all of the Republicans who voted repeatedly to repeal Affordable Care Act were voting, one of the things that would have done was repeal these protections for pre-existing conditions. Not a great thing to be campaigning on this particular year, as the voters have kind of warmed to those ideas. So yeah. What better to do than to bring out the old immigration issue and we're about to be invaded rhetoric that brings out and emotionalizes the base.
Martha McSally told Sean Hannity, and get the bleep ready, that she's getting her kicked over that
I think there were two bleeps in there.
Right.
Yeah.
But we'll see how that turns out. I see we have some
ballot propositions.
Dressed off stage. Do we? I don't know if we're going to get some races called soon. Bob, what do you make of the immigration issue? Why does it resonate? Does it still resonate in Arizona, with us being so intimately familiar with it?
I think it does resonate in Arizona. I do think that it's a turnout issue for the Trump Republican base. I think you're seeing that as something that helped curtail the blue wave and made it not as extensive as it otherwise might have been. And I think the caravan also raised issues even beyond the base about what in the world are we going to do? And do we really have...
We looked helpless to stop.
We look helpless in terms of how do we deal with that. So I think it put Trump's immigration policies in a better light, in a more reasonable light, although he quickly sort of couldn't stand being in the reasonable zone, and so leapt to getting rid of birthright citizenship by executive order.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how much of this could actually become policy now that we're out of the campaign tonight.
I do think we're seeing some effect of the red for ad, but after we call the...
Let's get some races called from Diana Nanez, straight from the breaking news desk. What has been called so far by the Associated Press?
Yes, we had two races called so far. They were not that big of a surprise. They were strongholds for Democrats. So we have Ruben Gallego, who has won his race in the 7th Congressional District. We also have Raul Grijalva, who has won his race in the 3rd Congressional District. This is one of those areas in the Tucson area, southern Arizona, where we've seen a lot of talk about the border security issues, but because he's in this area and he's in more of a secure area, he won this race. It was kind of expected.
Yeah, so those were, we could have called those at 5 o'clock this afternoon or at noon. And is there one more ready?
Yes, so we have 2 more results in. We Paul Gosar in the 4th Congressional District. We also have Andy Biggs in the 5th Congressional Districts. These were also kind of the opposite of that, expected results.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Keep us posted. Shout, shout, shout. We'll hear your. We'll listen for your voice when we get it going.
Nobody listened to Paul Gosar's brothers and sisters.
So he lost some votes from inside his family.
His family was totally against him, and everybody else was in his favor.
Was there?
This is good news for people like me, so maybe nobody will pay attention to my brother. That would be fabulous.
There we go. Yes.
That would be fantastic. Or the rest of my family, too. Yeah.
Well,
my
these-
cousin
yeah.
Dominic, don't listen to him under any circumstance. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, yeah, I mean, Grijalva, Gallego appeared with Bernie Sanders at a David Garcia rally, probably figuring he's safe to win.
Right.
Gosar and Biggs, was there any chance that either of these guys were going to lose? I guess Gosar maybe being the most probable? No.
No, none.
They went
I
exactly
mean,
as
the way
expected.
the districts are that stacked in favor of either Republicans or Democrats, depending on what you're going to talk about. And there are just a number of people that would vote for anyone as long as they were a Republican in a Republican district or a Democrat district.
Although I guess we saw in the special election with replacing Trent Franks with Lesko and Tippernany that there's some people that can be moved a little bit. But back to those issues we were talking about. I will just go in the same order we've been going in. Red for Ed, immigration, one was early, one was late. Which issue resonated with you? What did you think when you saw those issues come and in some cases go?
Well, I thought the way that immigration's being treated right now is pretty horrific. I mean, it's like demonizing people and making up a bunch of things that isn't there. So I don't know what to tell you. I think it's just awful the way that it's being done, and neither side has come up with a comprehensive immigration bill. You know, it's just fundraising and political football, and it's really frustrating because it's real. You see the pictures that you guys show, it's real people's lives, you know. So, and yeah, Red for Ed, I have kids in school, so obviously.
Did it stay with you? I mean, we've talked about how it's kind of faded out of the headlines. Did it stay with you this entire cycle?
I don't know. If you have a kid in school, like I do, it's like I drive down the, to drop my kids off, and the Red for Ed, like stickers are everywhere. It's like it's still in people's consciousness. I mean, we still care. I went actually to something from a talk about education the other day, and people are very passionate about it. And yeah, it's there. I mean, so don't think it went away. And I think that whoever wins will still be at their door. So I hope they're still really excited about education the day after the voting, because we're going to still be there regardless.
People can still hold on to their stock in red T-shirts.
Red T-shirts, yeah. And immigration.
Tim, these two issues, what did either one resonate with you? Did either one influence your vote? Immigration, Red for Ed.
Well, with immigration, the push was in the last week.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I voted like several weeks ago, so it was.
They missed you.
It was too late for that, and I happen to disagree completely with the president on immigration and the people with that. So that wasn't going to win me over one way or the other, and the timing was bad. The Red for Ed, I gave it a lot of thought. I have a bunch of friends on both sides. I think it kind of, the way I was leaning, again, they were talking about Ducey came out right at the beginning and said, hey, we're going to do these things. And I thought, well, that might be a win. That might be as good a win as you're going to get for the time being. And so But
I mean, was it meaning that satisfied you, like made you think we've
right, I thought, yeah, this is a great step. And yes, now we've still got our red T-shirts and everything. Let's keep this kindling. Yeah, let's keep this going.
But it's not dissonant with supporting Republicans. Like there would be Republicans who could still support education funding.
Yeah,
they showed it this last time.
Yeah, and I think everyone. I mean, no one is like against education funding, right? Like everyone's for it. It's just how do we get it there, and what's the best way to do it, and everything like that. So I think keeping that in everyone's mind. We've got a good slogan. We've got good things going. I think keeping that going is going to be an important part of the next 4 years that happen. Yeah, keep it a priority.
Given that human rights are your central issue, I'm guessing how you felt about immigration as an issue. Did education still resonate with you as an issue?
It's also a human right. We're entitled to learn about our world, and we can't do that to something billion short of 2008 funding. We got to find that money somewhere to put it into teacher salaries, paraprofessionals, infrastructure, There's so much that needs to be done to bring Arizona schools up to snuff. Broadband to everywhere. There's lots of things that all key off of human rights. And one thing I'm seeing these last little bit is campaigning on fear and using that to wedge the electorate, to pick it apart and take the ones you want and leave the others behind. With that, we've got to find a better way of doing this, to where we are one people again.
But fear works. And Bob, you spent time before you came to the newsroom as a political operative. We'll take you back to those days. Fear kind of works?
Emotional appeals do work, and students of advertising will tell you that that leads to altered behavior more quickly and more thoroughly than a reasoned argument. When I was a practitioner of the black arts of political consulting, I always
You
took...
wrote some of those ads. You had the deep voice narrator.
No, I did.
No, not that
I did not. I told my clients that if you win that way, you're just going to have to fight another day. If you win by winning the argument, then you've gained something that will last a little longer. And I do believe, particularly if you look at the McSally cinema race, both of them would have reason to believe that a fair discussion of policy differences could yield them a victory. Instead, they engaged in this liar-liar routine to an ultimate draw. The race started out a toss-up, it ended up a toss-up, it remains a toss-up tonight. So all of that nasty ads didn't move the needle at all. And I think if they had invested in winning a policy argument, that might have moved the needle, might have changed the result. And I think both of them had reason to believe that they could choose policy differences on which they could move the needle in their favor, and chose not to.
And we'll see if there's we have another race called. If we're ready for that call, I'll make the call, because Diana's still at the news desk. But we have David Schweikert winning re-election again. He's facing an ethics investigation, but not a surprise?
No surprise at all. I think that a couple of races that we haven't talked about that are worth watching down on the ballot a little bit are in state Senate races. Kate Brophy-McGee in District 28 is neck and neck with Christine Marsh, teacher, Red for Ed teacher.
Right, Teacher of the Year.
And yeah, in 2016. And in District 6, which is in northern Arizona, Sylvia Allen is having a tough time against Wade Carlisle, challenger in that race.
Right, all politics is local.
If those two fell, you would end up with a 15-15 state senate, which would be very, very interesting.
Which means they'd have to talk to each other to pass
legislation. Right, and all of a sudden, if Governor Ducey wants to get things done in the legislature, he's going to actually have to consult with Democrats as well as Republicans. So that's something worth watching, as is the race, talking about Ducey, as is the race for Secretary of State. If Katie Hobbs wins that, the political calculations for Doug Ducey change, because suddenly the number 2 person, the person who would take over if he leaves office, would be a Democrat. I think what it means is that you'll see Doug Ducey stay put for 4 years.
Oh, you're thinking that maybe there was a chance he was out the Governor Ducey may have not lasted his second term, that he may have sought higher office.
Well, seek higher office, seek a cabinet spot, whatever he would seek. Traditionally, we lose about one governor a decade who doesn't finish out his second term as he goes off for greener pasture. He or she goes off for greener pasture, so it wouldn't be that unusual.
Or is removed. Or a governor could be removed.
Well, that's happened too.
This governor, there's no hint of it, but yes, we've seen a few governors removed against their will.
So I guess at this point we pray and we want him to stay governor for 4 years because, Gaynor is still winning here, and we absolutely do not want Steve Gaynor as the next governor of Arizona. Because he is winning the Secretary of State, and he will be the next.
Why do we not want him for governor? You were in those editorial board meetings too, I take it?
That's correct.
And what did you think of the man?
he's not qualified to be in office. He's not qualified to hold any office in this one in particular, because he's a step away from the governor. I mean, he couldn't articulate anything. He essentially went after minorities, went after Spanish-speaking residents, went again anti gays and lesbians. So we do not want a governor that is going to go against all minorities and all Latinos and all gays and lesbians in the state. I do not want him as a governor.
Yeah, I was trying to look at the results. Oh, you had a thought on Gaynor.
No, I didn't. I was going to ask you to, one of the things I would be interested from the independent voters was number-wise, you look at all these different candidates, how many would you say that you felt you genuinely knew the people you were voting for? How many authentic candidates do you think you came away voting for?
I'm answering the question. I'm asking the questions.
Yeah. Well, we already know we have an unauthentic host. So that's the.
How many of these candidates did you feel you really got to know and like?
Well, from their campaigns, or from, yeah, I mean, isn't that kind of the new ad thing now? It's like I said, I mean, they try to not let you know who they are through the campaigns, but yeah, I mean, I've known some of these people because I've been interested in politics, so I've gone to house parties, you know, I've gone to like different things and been able to talk to them on a one-on-one.
You've met some.
I've met some of them, yeah. So those are the ones I know. But
the ones you've met, have they impressed upon you? Like Kenneth talked about meeting Senate candidate Abood. Have you met some that you thought?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like 2 of the ones that have been called for tonight, you know, I kind of wonder, you know, when somebody is just really
names,
rude, Schweikert and Gosar. I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm like, what
what
are you thinking? What are you thinking, voters? I know they're thinking Republican. They're thinking Second Amendment. You know, they're thinking, you know, like our economy's good. I guess like keep a Trump guy. They like the Trump guys. 6,000 people showed up to see Trump. You know, at the airport. So
right.
I mean, and I love democracy. So it's hard, right? When it's because you love democracy, but when democracy brings you Gosar and Schweikert, who we have met, and it's like, why? I don't know, but you wisdom of the voters, you know.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
We'll keep with Montini's question. I mean, did any of these candidates resonate with you on a personal level?
Probably the better known ones, no, but like I'm in Mesa, I met a lot of the city council candidates. I met a lot of the more local ones, Justice for the Peace and things like that. Some of them, you know, really getting to know them, really getting to find out their story, they resonated with me. And then I like doing deep research. So like this afternoon I was reading about the old McSally versus Rumsfeld when she did a court case against the Department of Defense so that the women at the airfield in Saudi Arabia didn't have to wear headscarves, things like that. So it was interesting.
You're doing research on candidates having already voted.
Yeah, because
wow.
I was coming here tonight and I had to not look like an idiot.
Well, that makes one
right,
of us.
Right. Yeah. I was trying to refresh everything, but I loved.
It's part of the rules.
Right. There was homework involved.
Right, right. I loved getting down into the you know, okay, who is this person? What kind of person is this in real depth? And again, we had this dinner time conversation, me and my children ahead of time, so I wanted to be able to tell them, hey, you can know way more about the candidates than the little sound bites that you're getting.
On a personal level, did any candidates speak to you, either in person or through their ads or
down
letters?
ballot more than at the statewide level?
Right.
And there's a few at the statewide level I would not touch with a 10-foot pole. And I will name names if you really want.
Yes.
McSally, no, absolutely not. Sinema, even though she voted with Trump 2/3 of the time, better by far.
Based on
voting record.
Oh, okay. But again, on a personal level,
yeah.
did
personal
you get to
level,
know
I
anybody?
had no connection. She was as much an enigma personally as anything. But her voting record speaks everything to me that way. Yeah. And I hope that she, you know, finds what she needs to speak out for her constituency instead of just buying into money.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing. We are such a
the
big
big
state.
thing about Red for Ed is Red for Ed lost their momentum when their proposition got tossed off. That took a lot of wind out of the sails, and that's where I was really meeting and greeting people.
Yeah, and you must have asked that question for a reason, but it's like we're probably too big of a state to go shake everybody's hand, but there has to be some level where you get to know people.
You have a sense of, do you know these people based on what you've seen and read about them? But the other question for Bob Robb, being the expert here about this, is, so now we've lost McCain, we're losing Flake. What kind of national impact does Arizona have anymore? Or do we have any more?
Well, because McCain was a guy that, even though most Arizonans probably hadn't met him face to face, we felt like we knew the guy.
Also, your state had some juice in a way that that maybe now you drop way down under the radar in terms of national significance.
I think that's more of a personality. I think one of you were talking about the traditional ads do not work well. Not in the sense that you're going to buy a 30-second TV ad and that's it, but you know, it has worked. You know, and I think you talked about it before. And now we're micro advertising. You know, there's no place in the internet that you could have gone without seeing those ads. So McCain was just a marketing genius, essentially. You know, to your point about that, the state really didn't know him as a person, as you know, the touch him, but he was genius. So we need another marketing genius to have that kind of impact, and I think, you know, we may have it. Of course, you know, he's of substance because he's been there for 30 years.
I was going to say, I would disagree with that McCain was all marketing. McCain...
Well, at the beginning, no, but I'm saying, he's
that,
of substance because he's been there for 30 years, but he was not the person at the beginning that he is. He didn't carry that weight.
For decades, we have had people representing us in Congress who have been experts in various areas, giants, Mo Udall, I mean, John Rhodes, Carl Hayden. McCain, I would put in that crowd. I don't put any of the people that we have in there now in that category.
We'll find out more people who are going into office because Diana's back with some more race calls. Diana, what do we have?
Yes, I'm back. Still shouting in the newsroom, not shouting at you right now. But I think we already went over Schweikert, right?
Yes.
So we have some ballot measures to go over. We have Proposition 127. So most people know Proposition 127 as the California-esque ballot measure. It was to require a expansion of energy sources to be renewable energy sources. I believe it was a 50% by 2030. That was rejected. Ballot Measure 126 was the ban on new tax services, ban on new taxes on services. That was approved. Voters backed that. They wanted to see that. We had some even conservatives come out and say they wanted the flexibility, given that there were education services that they wanted to fund with that. But that has been approved, and
services being taxed has passed.
Yes.
It's banned. Okay.
Yes, and that was one that we saw a lot of people that don't normally come out and want to be able to say no new taxes. We had conservatives say we want the flexibility to say in the future, should we need to have an investment, and particularly in education, that's where we saw it. That was where the conversation happened, where you saw a little bit of bipartisanship saying, I'm not sure we want this ban.
And there's more measures.
Nope, that was it. We had
those two.
Stanton. He was expected, and he did win CD9. That was Sinema's seat. He took that. And then we had two Arizona Supreme Court justices were up for retain or not retain. Pellender has come through, and again, well, we see these typically happen. They are approved and kept.
Both?
Just Pellender.
Just the one?
Just Pellender right now.
Clint
Just
Bollock
right now.
is still...
Clint Bollock.
Pellender has been approved. Clint Bollock has not. Thank you, Diane.
Not yet.
Yeah, right. Clint Bollock has not been retained yet.
Yet.
It's still too close to call.
We do not have a result yet. Yes.
It's a sizable.
72% retention vote,
and he needs 50.
50% plus one. And there's like 400,000.
Yes.
There are about 400,000 votes.
And they called Pellender with which percentage?
74. So it's 74 versus 72.
It's not that bad. Yeah, and there was a slight campaign to try to get people to not vote for the justices because of red for red. I don't know these things, how often they work, how often they don't work. It just seems like judges are going to stay for a while, it seems. Yeah. The Stanton race a surprise?
No, but I want to go back to Prop 127. I
Yes,
think that APS should be sending roses or something to Mark Brnovich. Brnovich, as you may know, was the Attorney General who at the last minute changed the language on the ballot description to add the words irrespective of cost to the measure. Normally those descriptions are supposed to just basically tell you what the thing does and leave to the campaigns what impact it will have. Even the state elections director, Eric Spencer, found it eyebrow-raising that the Attorney General would add this language. And within about, 2 minutes after he did that, APS was out with ads against 127 talking about that very language. This thing will make your bills go high, because of this irrespective of cost language. I would imagine that hurt that campaign pretty much dead in the water the moment that Attorney General Brnovich did that.
Was there any traction for sort of an anti-APS vote out of all this?
It felt that way at the beginning, for sure, but then there was so much money, that APS spent against this initiative in particular. Then, of course, you have the help from the Attorney General here. So, but, in the end, no.
I'm no huge fan of APS because of the way that they've pretty much bought the Corporation Commission, which raises our electricity rates. And it was very difficult for me to come to the decision. I actually opposed Prop 127, and it killed me because all of a sudden I was on the same side with APS. But it is just problematic to go setting your energy policy as part of the state constitution. That's really not the place that you can do it. If in fact rates had gone sky high, there'd be nothing that you could do about it unless you went back and re-amended the Constitution. Right, it's a crazy way to
the only disagreement with that is that given the fact that APS has such a stranglehold on the rate-making policy, this was the only way that regular citizens could have gone after it in a way.
That's not true, though. They could have changed the Corporation Commission, and what I'm seeing in the results so far...
But you can't beat that. You can't do that when you have so much money. I mean, what this proves is that money really, really does talk, that money wins elections. I mean, they spent an enormous amount of money.
I don't know if we can get the Corporation Commission result up so far.
Yeah, they're pretty depressing. Yeah. But it's close.
But this time, in contrast to past elections, APS didn't spend big. And Tom Steyer did spend big on behalf of the Democrats.
Oh, but we see, here we go, here comes the Corporation Commission races, and yes, well, it looks like...
The margin is such that Sandra Kennedy could overcome that margin, but it's about 20,000
And is Kiana Sears below there?
Yeah, she's
too far beyond.
Well, you just got to
there we go.
Click a button to get her.
Oh,
up.
so it's not.
So yeah, she's trailing, and probably I don't think that both Democrats can overcome. But it's a 20,000 margin with probably over 1 million votes yet to be counted.
I guess that's. I mean, you were saying it's too difficult to change the makeup of the corporation.
Given the fact, I think the Corporation Commission races and all of these races have a lot to do with the proposition race this time. That's where all the money was, and the idea of frightening you into believing that your utility bills are going to skyrocket out of the universe causes people, I think, to go with people whom they think are going to be more restrictive on pricing, which they probably think is this way, which is not correct. And it's not that APS isn't spending a lot of money this year, it's just that they have, over the course of how many years, continually spent a lot of money to buy the Corporation Commission.
And it is impossible. It is nice to say that you can change it. I actually supported Proposition 127. I had problems that it was a constitutional amendment, but precisely for that reason. There's no other way at this moment in time that regular folks in Arizona can make significant changes, giving APS and giving the Corporation Commission and giving everything else. There's no feasible way to do it.
They can do it tonight still if this comes through. And in a way, I think that the changes are already being made. If you follow this race, several of the candidates, including Justin Olson, have talked about creating a rule within the commission that commissioners and candidates can't
yes, of course. It is possible to do it if people vote, but then you have a lot of money, precisely to get the votes.
In this race in their debate,
even the Republicans were they were even calling APS the bad guy. There was nobody in the race that was defending APS.
So there's a lot more work in Prop 127, a lot more going on here. Yes, it was shaped by Arizonans who believed in renewable energy and moving toward that future faster. But there's a principle I teach my sons. I was teaching them how to be an Arizona sports fan. And the first rule of being an Arizona sports fan is you have to hate every team from Los Angeles. That's how we began. We don't like California, and we don't like billionaires who come calling with all their money to get us to do what California is doing. And I think that had real impact, and it was why the opponents were able to line up a huge coalition against this of all different groups, both progressive, conservative, mainstream, against it.
Oddly enough, Tom Steyer, he came into the building and was interviewed on The Gaggle, which is available on your AZ Central iTunes website, and political coverage is free until the election results are all solidified. And then we hope you subscribe to AZ Central. But Tom Steyer said that with all the work he had done, especially on voter outreach in other states, this was the first time he was personally vilified as that Californian. Maybe it is an Arizona thing. I don't know if that's just a winning strategy to say that the California billionaire wants us to do
well,
his
it's a way
bit.
of taking your eye off the ball. I mean, then suddenly it's not about the issue, it's about the person. It's about some prejudice that you may hold toward this place. And what does that have to do with anything when it comes to the actual issue? It really has nothing to do with the
but
issue.
it is true that he did come in and
But it still doesn't matter. So what?
Self-financed this
But
thing. He's the
so
only
what?
guy that put any money into it. There was no Arizona money behind
But
this.
actually, that's
But it's the
great.
idea.
I actually like that idea because, you know, APS has been spending so much money and there's so much money on the other
But the
side that
only way
finally,
to
I
do
don't
it-
care where the guy is from, at least there's some even here. So we're spending a lot of money on the other side. Let's compete. That's what we call competition.
If there is a groundswell of people that want to do this, where was the money from within Arizona to push this idea? It was a guy who had an idea from outside the state. He's also doing it in Nevada and some other places. He came in, he said, I'll fund this whole thing. They're like, great, let's go for it. Of course he was going to be the
Okay,
issue.
so to your point, then how Arizonans are going to be able to change?
Corporation Commission, Corporation
Step
Commission.
one.
Corporation Commission, wherever you are. Yes,
But I
that's
guess
what
even,
you change.
But I guess even there,
and that's what you pay attention
do you expect, and I know you'll be watching, whoever's elected, if it is those two Republicans, they vowed to be strong against APS.
And all they have to do is side with Commissioner Bob Burns.
Who wants to open up APS's books.
Exactly. He's been on a 3-year quest to open up their books to find out whether APS secretly funded campaigns in 2014 to essentially buy 2 of those seats. In 2016, they didn't even bother hiding it. They just did it above board. But I think that you've begun to see, even though it could be an all-Republican commission, you've begun to see some cracks in that to where some people are saying, wait a minute, maybe APS is pulling too many strings here. Maybe if we're going to have regulators, we ought to have independent regulators who are watchdogs for the public, for our utility bills, rather than for APS.
And I guess let's talk about the sales tax on services initiative, which that ban has passed. Governor Ducey was against it. David Garcia, his challenger, was against it. Republicans were against it. Democrats were against it. It's now, apparently, according to the Associated Press, become law. What does this do to the state?
Well, it limits the state's ability to do much for education, in a way. There was talk that perhaps they would raise the sales tax, or lower the sales tax by broadening the base and including some services. And now that's off the table. So you either go with a plain old sales tax increase or some other kind of tax increase or whatever else you're going to try to do. But that's now going to be off the table. And they sold that as, oh, they're going to come and tax your child care benefits and things like that. And that's never really been on the table. But it was a brilliant campaign because nobody wants higher taxes. Of course they're going to vote.
I mean, people.
It was the realtors. it was one group spent an entire amount of money.
Which oddly enough gives us all our I voted today stickers.
That's exactly.
They're the same group. But the candidates had talked about, like Ducey had talked about, pursuing a tax reform that would have lowered overall rates and maybe expanded the base, and now that's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rob, your thoughts on those propositions, and I don't know if you've seen others popping up. Why did the sales tax ban on services pass? Is that a surprise to you?
It is only because there were opinion polls that showed it losing handily. This is actually the result that, except for those polls, I would have expected. You have millions of dollars spent arguing to put a lid on taxes. No really funded opposition. You had a hodgepodge of interested parties and tax policy wonks who thought it was a bad idea. It doesn't actually preclude something like Ducey has talked about or hinted at of broadening the sales tax base to include services and using those proceeds either to improve spending. It requires now a constitutional amendment. You got to go back to the voters, and chances are anything that was done was going to be submitted to the voters anyway. It makes drafting it far more complicated because ideally you would do it statutorily rather than constitutionally. You really don't want to lock tax policy into the Constitution.
But here we've locked it into the Constitution.
Yes,
so you'd have to have the voters repeal it from the Constitution and then add it as a state statute. My head is spinning.
The easiest way, the cleanest way to do it would be to pass a statute that created the tax reform that you wanted and make its implementation contingent upon the approval of a proposition amending the Constitution to remove this restriction.
Could you write that commercial in 30 seconds or create a mailer that lets people know?
Well, yeah, vote yes to lower your income taxes and increase funding for K through 12 education. There's your 30-second commercial.
The man hasn't lost his political consulting moxie. Let's talk propositions with our independent voters. What did you think of the, let's talk about any of them that you wish, but what did you think of the electricity renewable energy initiative?
I'm disappointed, obviously, because I mean, you know, with all of the information coming up that like in 12 years we need to make some real changes, it's like now this just kind of complicates it. You know, it would have been easier to have a clear vision, like, yes, we're going to do solar, let's work on it, all hands on deck, let's do this, you know, and now it's going to get a little bit more probably complex and complicated. And this is the problem with democracy, is as great as democracy is, unfortunately not all the voters like do their homework, you know, so of course like you're going to just...
You mean not all voters read AZ Central?
No, and they should. Get your subscription today.
Get your subscription. Thank you.
Thank
you for doing the commercial
No, but seriously, yeah, I mean, this and other things, and I get it, everybody's busy, but this is the kind of thing where wonks should have been making this decision. Do you know what I mean? It's like not the person that does 10 minutes of research.
That you would have rather have seen the Corporation Commission tackle this.
And it's a lack of political courage, let's put it, that they put it out to the voters. Of course voters are going to say, no, we don't want taxes, but you got to sell that to them, like this is why, you know, we don't have property tax, we don't have, how are we going to pay for stuff, you know, and
yeah, well, both of these, were put on with signature gathering, so it was kind of like a committee deciding the voters should do it. What did you think of the renewable energy?
Well, the comment you made about the Mark Bronovich putting that language in, every single person thinking back now that said we can't do this quoted that line. Like everyone that I know that was telling me, because I came out, I talked to Jeremy Whitaker, who's on Mesa City Council. He had this really great blog post about the benefits of it. And so I just posted that and said, hey, what does everyone think? And I was really surprised how many people, I think a lot of people quoted that exact thing or something very similar to it. I ended up, I really want to switch to renewable energy, but I want it to be more, everyone has it on their own house. So in the end, I was like, well, this isn't the way I want this law to work, but I do want us all to switch to renewable energy. So I hope that the momentum for that does keep building.
Well, and I guess that is, part of the worry was that the economies of scale hadn't worked, that when it's nighttime and the sun goes down, the batteries are too expensive to keep solar power running.
Right.
Did you have faith that by the time we're talking about 10 years, 20 years down the road, that technology would have improved to the point where it made sense?
Do I have faith in technology? Well, the it's the money, right? The technology is there, but it is still very expensive.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I'm more of I want to own my own solar power station on my house the way I own my own washing machine and not have to go to a laundromat. So I was when I first heard about it, I'm like, oh great, I hope it's that. And then I read it, I'm like, oh, it's not exactly what I want yet. But I do hope it keeps moving so that we can get solar power everywhere, because if there's any place on the planet that should have it, it's the Valley.
I remember writing term papers as far back as 5th grade about solar power in Arizona.
Come on.
I don't know what did you think of the
How many
renewable energy
rooftops do we have? We could do solar on homes so much easier than having it through APS. But then again, with APS pouring money in Brnovich's pocket and pouring it into the campaign against it, we got to get something.
Was there any wariness at it being in the Constitution, sort of being voter protected in the Constitution, something that would be hard to change if things went awry?
Yes and no. Yes, it would be hard to change. No, because honestly, APS has the Corporation Commission in its pocket to do what it wants when it wants.
You would have thought that if it had gone awry, they would have somehow been able to convince voters or the Corporation Commission.
We got to do something. This was something that I saw as a way of forward.
The sales tax on services. Did you see a lot of information about that? What did you think of that?
Honestly, that was a solution in search of a problem, very much like the bathroom bills from several years ago. Just looking for a solution when there really isn't to a problem that doesn't exist yet.
So you weren't in favor of it?
Not at all. Honestly,
and it passed.
taxes need to happen if we're going to have the money to pay for stuff, and education especially. We got to find it somewhere.
The services ban, sales tax. Did you hear a lot about that? What were your thoughts on that?
I didn't read it. I didn't hear as much about it. It wasn't, I think, as big up there. But as I read through it, I thought, okay, well, where do architects fall in on this? How come I'm not in a protected class and these people are? So that's sort of the direction I went on it. I thought, okay, well, let's find some more common ground on it. I think I'm kind of like you. I didn't understand exactly what it was trying to do and why I wasn't a part of it.
Oh, architects were not included in it.
Yeah, I didn't.
Architects would have been interesting.
But if architects had been included, because I'm an architect, then, oh, okay, great.
Then you would have voted with your literal pocketbook.
That is interesting about like what sales tax affects
we have some more races to call. Let's go right to the breaking news roundtable. Diana Yanez, what do we have?
Okay, so I literally ran here for this, for you. Okay, so Doug Ducey has won re-election. He has beat David Garcia. That has been called just minutes ago. Earlier, we also had Proposition 305. That was rejected. Voters rejected that. They decided that they would not allow an expansion. It was a large expansion for voucher money for parents to send their children to private charter schools.
All right, that's a lot. Thank you so much. We'll see if there's more races to be called. Let's talk about, while I have you here, that Red for Ed voucher bill. I'm sorry, we have to go back to the previous, before Red for Ed, because this was sort of the group that got the precursor to Red for Ed, was a bunch of mothers seeing the voucher expansion bill pass, got it on the ballot. They wanted voters to decide whether they wanted it expanded. Apparently voters have said they didn't.
Good job, voters. No, this is good because a lot of times we're like, how are we going to pay for things? And this is one of those things that you have to say, how are you going to pay for it? And there was enough abuse, or there wasn't enough accountability in the system. Also, when our education dollars are so spread thin, I mean, we got to focus now and decide where things should. So I think it's a great outcome that.
Tim, your thoughts on that measure?
Well, our kids go to some charter schools, and we do a mix. We homeschool some go to public schools, some go to charters.
So you could have taken advantage of an expansion for the homeschool.
Yeah, and we keep thinking that. We're like, we're paying for everyone else's kids to go to school, and then we're spending the time educating ours on our own. So I guess I'm a little more, when I saw that it could be expanded, I thought, well, I'm still waiting for it to come to homeschool kids, which I don't think is happening anytime soon. But I thought, well, this is a direction I'd like to go because of the way we choose to live our life and kind of the opportunities we have. But I know that not everybody has that, and so sometimes you have to consolidate around a stronger
right. So I'll take you as a qualified supporter of what was done.
Yeah.
And your thoughts on that? Are you
Honestly,
surprised the voters rejected it?
No. It needed to go down because right now, if that would have gone through, the only people that really would have utilized it already can spend money to put their kids into private schools.
And I think what you're referring to is some stories that have been done by Rob Odell, Yvonne Wingett, available on AZ Central, free for the next few days. But it is that thing that looks like, and our columnists have already talked about this. Laura, you've been on this. Montini's been on this too, about who would have used these empowerment vouchers. Are you surprised the voters rejected the expansion?
No, not at all. If you looked at these vouchers, if these vouchers covered the true cost of private education, then it would be an equal shot for anyone to go. But honestly, these vouchers only cover a portion of the cost, meaning you're going to have to supplement thousands of dollars out of your own pocket. Who can do that? It's going to be the more well-to-do people people in the suburbs who can take off. Rob Odell and Yvonne Winget Sanchez have done analyses of who gets the empowerment scholarship counts, as these vouchers are known now, and it's not poor children escaping failing schools. It's well-to-do children in wealthier districts escaping schools that are graded as A or B by the State Department of Education.
But again, you get that almost like dyslexic voter thing, where they recognize this, right? They recognize that this was a bad idea and they rejected it soundly, and yet they re-elected all of the people who pushed this through. This was a big deal for Governor Doug Ducey. It was a big deal for all the Republicans.
I think he described it, and he doesn't want to play small ball. This was a signature.
Yeah, this was a really big deal to him. So it's always a curiosity where voters figure out something like this, bad idea, and then re-elect all the people who initiated this bad idea.
Well, it may be that the voters are discerning that a governor has a much broader responsibilities than a single ballot proposition and is to be judged on much more than just that.
No, but if he considers it his signature issue and it's his big deal, and all these other guys, same thing. It's like, what was more important than that?
To your point, I think he campaigned more on the economy and jobs.
Well, he campaigned on a lot of things, and he's much more than the sum of a single ballot proposition. That doesn't define who he is. And voters are able to discern that, but voters understand that.
Well, he didn't also, again, we're back to David Garcia, but David Garcia never really put forth an education plan, and he never really took advantage to really stick it to Governor Ducey on some of these issues. Had a stronger candidate been running, you might have seen some different results.
Well, I guess we talk about Invest in Ed not being on the ballot. This was on the ballot, but not much was made of it. It seemed like both sides sort of, I mean, there was a heavy no campaign. It's kind of the school choice advocates kind of gave this one a pass.
Because the yes campaign was still kind of iffy because, you know, it capped at 30,000 or something, and 30,000 students, right? So they were like, maybe we don't want this either because we want to have the flexibility, right? So, yeah, it was just out there.
But are you surprised that it took the Associated Press this long to call the race for Ducey? I mean, you talked about you expected him to win. Is this?
You could have called it last Thursday.
Polite, yeah.
It's polite.
It's a polite thing to do,
yeah.
It's respectful to wait a little
What do you expect to see in a second Ducey term? Do you expect that he's going to try to make a run at the Empowerment Scholarship?
Oh, I don't know if he'll do that. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see. I think the next big interesting question is what happens with John Kyle, and who if John Kyle chooses to leave at the end of the year, who replaces him, and who gets into that race. That I think will be the next big Arizona question.
And it also depends who wins, whether Martha McSally or Sinema, because, you know, the conventional wisdom says that if Martha McSally loses tonight, she might be appointed to Kyle's seat. If not, then the dominoes, you know, Ducey himself may finally want to, you know, enter the race if that is the case. So we don't know.
It's kind of interesting, the idea that he would appoint someone that the voters rejected. Don't you think? I mean, can he really put Martha McSally in that job if the voters have just rejected her? I guess he can.
He can, yeah.
We had another proposition apparently that was called a more obscure one, but it puts the Clean Elections Commission sort of under the governor's regulatory
another really bad
commission.
idea. That's another one the voters didn't figure out. I mean, they got suckered on that one. You know, I guess it takes a while. It's back in 1998, the Clean Elections Commission is formed. It's independent.
By the voters.
By the voters, and here it is, the voters removing that independence, essentially allowing now a panel of people appointed by the governor to have control over the way the Clean Elections runs.
And I guess the Clean Elections was kind of introduced to say, let's try to remove money from politics.
Well, that, and they also have been on the leading edge in Arizona of trying to force more disclosure of dark money, which of course Governor Ducey and the legislature are fans of dark money. They think it's a First Amendment issue. I don't think it is, and neither do many of the Supreme Court justices in the United States Supreme Court. But the impetus for this particular proposition, I believe, was to force the Clean Elections Commission under the thumb of the Governor's Regulatory Review Commission, which is, of course, made up all of Governor Ducey's appointees. And they, in the past, have tried to stop the Clean Elections folks from forcing dark money disclosure. So I think that's what this was about, and it's a shame to see it pass.
Yeah, they should remove the independent part from the Clean Elections Commission because that's no longer the case.
Right. So again, we were talking about Governor Ducey's second term. You don't think that we will see, does anyone think we'll see another run at the empowerment scholarships when the legislative session
Well,
opens?
I think you have to wait until the next meeting of the ALEC people and the Koch funders to find out if they're interested in continuing to pursue this. I would say we will see it. I will bet that it probably won't be this coming year. Let things cool down a little bit and memories fade, and I think some iteration of it, some version will come back.
Yeah, I definitely think it will come back at some point. Yeah.
Right, as it goes. Are some propositions just too complicated for voters to grasp, or do you think voters actually take the time? When we talked about our independent voters here seem to be high information voters. There's a lot of low information voters out there too. I think Jimmy Kimmel proved that earlier at the state fair. How do you get messages out to voters, and what do you think about as far as voters educating themselves?
I think it's sometimes voters can figure out a complicated measure. I think they did that on Proposition 127. The energy one, and particularly where attention is brought to it by advertising.
Right, they get a lot of help.
And even if the advertising is misleading, it leads to interest. And so people look into it and they reach conclusions. When you've got a technical change that appears to be hidden within a appealing notion, let's not let our money go to the political parties, and there isn't any funding on either side, then they sometimes can not fully understand the import of what they're doing. It's even nuts to say that candidates running on a political party's platform can't pay the party for services that people who aren't publicly funded can pay for. So even the first part of it didn't make any sense, but it appealed to sort of the instinct. We don't like political parties, so we don't want any of our money, publicly financed money, going to the political parties. And there was nobody around investing any money by saying, hey, let's think about this. I mean, political parties exist in order to elect candidates.
I don't know, could the Clean Elections Commission, did they have to be neutral on this ballot measure? I don't know how that worked out.
I don't know. They didn't need to be neutral, but they can't spend their money advocating a point of view. And there just wasn't any money on either side. And the element of having the governor's regulatory review commission review the regulations, which I don't think will have as large of an impact as commonly thought, but that was something that resulted from repealing an exemption the Clean Election Commission had to a section of statute that allows the Regulatory Review Commission to review rules. So it wasn't even in the proposition, hey, if you vote for this, this is what it's going to happen. It was this reference, this internal reference, is deleted from the Clean Election Statute.
Yeah, and we have laptops open. I don't know if we have renewed numbers on, because
well,
there's still the Cinema McSally race out.
Yeah, and McSally is opening up a larger lead. It's now about 12,000 votes. It keeps growing. But what we haven't talked about is in several House races, state House races, a Democrat is either leading to pick up a Republican seat or is narrowly hanging on. So there's still about 1 million votes left to be counted. It can change. But right now, it looks like there is a realistic prospect that the Republican advantage in the House will narrow perhaps considerably. So I do think you do have...
The House, I mean our delegation out of Arizona and
No, the State House.
State House.
The State House.
Oh, the state legislator house.
You do have a Democratic pickup of McSally's seat down in Tucson. So part of the Democrats taking over the federal House of Representatives, Arizona is contributing to that by turning McSally's
Oh,
seat
but
blue.
you're showing
The
Democrats
state-
taking control.
Not taking control, but right now Republicans in the Arizona House of Representatives have a 35-25 advantage. It looks like that will narrow, and perhaps narrow considerably.
Are there some races that you're seeing that are tipping that?
There are 3 or 4 races in which Democrats are leading in a seat that's currently held by the Republicans.
Are there some races you know by name?
And well, you've got District 6 in northeastern Arizona. You've got District 18 in Tempe. You've got District 28 in sort of the Arcadia area. And there's a couple others out there. There is one Democratic seat where a Republican is currently leading that would counterbalance it. But it certainly looks like at present there's a very good chance that the Republican control of the Arizona House of Representatives will be narrowed and perhaps narrowed considerably.
And the Senate, I don't know if we've seen up
It
there
looks
numbers from
like it's
Sylvia
going to,
Allen.
yeah, right. Well, you have Sylvia Allen in a district in northeastern Arizona, and Kate Brophy-McGee in the Arcadia area, who are up by narrow margins. But right now, you would assume that the Senate would stay as it is, 17-13 advantage to the Republicans.
Okay, we have Diana Nanez back at the calling the race table. Diana, what did we have from the Associated Press?
We have Proposition 306. That has been approved. Again, voters have approved Proposition 306. In a nutshell, that gave the governor, a commission appointed by the governor, more authority over the Citizens Clean Elections Commission.
Oh yeah, I beat you calling that. I apologize.
Ah, I'm so sorry. I guess I didn't yell loud enough and long enough. All right. Well, that was it. I came over here just for that one.
Okay.
So I'm out. Okay. Thanks.
And we still have, thank you, and because we're still waiting on the U.S. Senate race between Martha McSally, Kirsten Sinema. As Bob Rapp said, McSally seems to be inching ahead just a few, 10,000, 12,000 votes. We have the governor's race called, but no other statewide races, including Secretary of State, Superintendent of Public Instruction, State Treasurer, Mine Inspector, where we should just put up the mugshots of Bill Pierce, who has become a meme on social media as people are looking at the Mine Inspector's race. We have still some congressional races outstanding, and we still have some state legislative races calling. And I don't know if anyone's seen any numbers that jump out on any of the races. I don't have. I'm the only one without a laptop besides Montini here, so I can't see where we are with any.
No, it's still the
race.
same. All the state races leaning Republican, which to me it tells me that the women vote, millennials and minorities, specifically Hispanics, did not materialize because Democrats were counting on them. They were counting on Me Too movement, you know, the women to get out, educators for sure, you know, a number of educators running for office. I guess that didn't have a huge effect on here, so that's telling me a little something about this group of voters did not materialize
right now
tonight.
the Republicans statewide seem to have an advantage in every race, and McSally has an advantage over Sinema.
Slightly, right.
Slightly.
There is a lot of votes left to be counted, but this actually doesn't surprise me. We sort of hear this every 2 years from the Democrats that, oh, the great sleeping giant has awakened, and it snores right through Election Day. And to their credit, this time the Democrats were able to get out quite a few more voters and younger voters as well. So we'll see what the night presents, but it's not surprising to me that Republicans will almost run the gamut on the statewide elected
It's only
offices.
surprising because of Donald Trump, of the president, and so I guess the nation was hoping that, you know, if not his name, his agenda and his demeanor was really on the ballot, and that every state was actually going to go out and protest Donald Trump, and it appears that that's not happening.
I think that had more to do with the national races than the state races. I think state races pretty much.
But if a lot
maintain
more,
state
if a
races.
lot more Democrats show up to vote, you know, the blue waves that she's talking about, then every race benefit.
Well, I will also say, if, in terms of the statewide ticket, which the Democrats, the head of that ticket is David Garcia. And, you know, there are not a lot of coattails there to bring you down the ballot.
Right.
I would imagine.
At his final rally, Bernie Sanders was with him, but there was no other statewide Democratic candidate.
Well, because all of the rest of them knew that you don't go anywhere near that guy if you want to be elected in Arizona. It's just another example of really bad campaign.
And there were some Republican women, sort of in, you know, who were against Trump, and I talked to one in particular who was against Trump, so was going to vote for the Democrats for the federal offices, but was still a Republican and still wanted to vote for the slate of Republican state candidates. We'll see. I mean, who knows what the exit polls will show and the final analysis of all this.
At the national level, we're seeing that, and Phil and I were looking at the screen here. So Democrats take the House, Republicans keep the Senate. Ted Cruz in Texas wins. You know, that was a huge blue wave that everyone was talking about. So even at the national level, the women that you were talking about against Trump, so it didn't help.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Democrats may have been turning out, but in bigger numbers, but the math was too daunting because somewhere along the way, the Republicans found their energy and their enthusiasm and got motivated to vote. I think the Kavanaugh hearings were big, and you can look at, if you go to Real Clear Politics where they average all the polls, if you go and look at that Senate race in Texas, Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz, and you take the slider that on the date of when that race changes and you put it on October 5th, when the Kavanaugh hearings wrap up, you see this major leap in the numbers for both Democrats and Republicans, but the Republican number even leaps higher. And I think Republicans were furious about how that hearing took place and what happened there, and I think it motivated them.
So yeah, Republicans who might have stayed home, sat out the midterms, the Kavanaugh hearings might have gotten them.
I think it was huge with the Republicans. I think it really amped up their enthusiasm to get out and vote, and to vote straight Republican. I heard a lot of Republicans saying, I'm going straight ticket now, that's it.
Did you see the Kavanaugh hearing? I mean, and you get phone calls and emails from our readers?
Yes, tons and tons of them. I absolutely agree with Phil. Republicans and independents as well. I think a fair number of them were horrified by just the way that the Democrats mishandled that whole thing. It started from the very beginning when, within hours of Kavanaugh being nominated, Democrats were saying we're going to do everything we can to make sure that he doesn't get elected. And then, of course, the late thing that came up with the allegations against him, a lot of people just didn't feel like it was fairly handled. And Democrats were fairly hysterical if you watched any of that hearing. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen, where you bring up somebody's high school yearbook and, you know, going through what they wrote when they were 16 years old. I think that backfired on them big time.
Is that what you were seeing in your emails and phone calls about the Kavanaugh hearing?
No.
You were seeing?
I was seeing some differences. I mean, I think the fact of the matter is there were some people who felt really strongly about him not being honest, and there were others who very much disagreed with the process. I think it was very hard and perhaps impossible to get at the truth under those circumstances in that particular kind of hearing. And there's never enough time, and there's never enough exploration of a person's character, and that's just the way that was going to go. I think that ultimately Democrats made a mistake by pursuing it so hard, but I think there were some valuable questions that should have been asked then, and we never got around to them.
So it was a process. There were two issues going on there. Yes, Democrats essentially said from the beginning, we're going to oppose this guy no matter what, but so they didn't use a normal process, and so it began with Dianne Feinstein, senator from California, having the letter from the accuser for what, 3 months, the whole summer, and then all of a sudden comes out, and essentially they did it as a last resort because, everything else had failed at that point. So I think everyone, or the readers that I talked to, which, clearly we know that there are many, they were really angry that it wasn't really about the sexual misconduct accusation. It was more about the process and how the Democrats handled that issue. So that was a problem. That was really the problem. And we're talking about an incident that happened in high school, for goodness sake. And so to your point, it was really the process that everyone was angry about.
Well, and I guess let's take a fresh look at the federal race, the Sinema-McSally race, which I'm guessing we probably won't see a result this evening, just the way the ballots are going to be counted. And with so many people who were still standing in line, and maybe the final votes are being cast as we speak here around 9 o'clock, that may be too close to call the rest of the night. We may have to wait a while. The statewide races, we still see, obviously the governor has been called, but we still, it's too close to call on a Secretary of State. I'm just looking at the difference there, 36,000, Gaynor 51%. Brnovich has a more comfortable lead over January Contreras. Mark Brnovich at 53%. Frank Riggs, that seems incredibly close. About 50% to about 50%, 49.8. And Kate Brophy-McGee eking out something over a lead. And we'll see tell us about what we can see as far as like the batch of the voting, Maricopa County versus statewide. When will we see revised numbers, new numbers?
So the Secretary of State's data guru, Garrett Archer, just tweeted out his estimate of what's left out. And it's about 950,000 votes, over 65% of them from Maricopa County. Unless something very unusual happens, that's not good news for the Democrats in statewide races that are lagging behind at present.
Okay, all right. Let's do a final roundtable with our independent voters. And we'll go the other way this time. We'll start with you, Kenneth.
Yes, sir.
Takeaways from the night, anything surprise you from the results we've seen so far?
Honestly, I would have hoped for more seats to flip blue. That's just my own personal opinion based on what the candidates were doing before tonight's election.
Statewide and federal?
State, federal, any level, all the way down the ballot. The big thing for me, it's not just about the election. The election is one night, and then we've got 2 years to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they stay on their job of working for us, not working for the people who are lining their pockets.
What surprised you tonight, Tim? What are your takeaways?
Nothing surprised me. That's a boring answer, but I wasn't really expecting one thing real strong one way or the other, so I wasn't really surprised by anything.
Happy with any result?
I think Ducey's, I like the things that he's done. I think the economy's going well. I like that he's bringing a lot of new investment into the area. I was talking to a contractor today that was talking about some day laborers that he hired, and he said, they used to charge $10 an hour, now they're charging $12 an hour. So they've got a pay increase of 20%. And I said, well, that's for all the problems with it, that's a big pay increase. Like, I'm going to call that a win, and let's hope that things keep getting better for everybody. But there's some things about the economy that I think are really good, and when the economy's going well, I think that makes a lot of things better and easier for everybody. So I do like the way the economy's going, and I like the way that Ducey's been working on that.
I'm not sure whether Ducey could run on price increases for day laborers, but I see what you mean. A rising tide lifts all boats.
It did not come from Doug Ducey.
What surprised you?
I think that politicians get a lot of credit for things that working people do, like the $2 for the day laborers. Well, mostly it's because Arizona voters made minimum wage higher, so it has to do with that, and with individual people working every day, the ones that, you know, these guys do their thing, but we get up every day and work and decide like what, as much as we can, what wages can be. But, you know, there's, I don't know, I think that they get a little bit too much credit for the
and tonight,
economy.
And tonight, is there anything that really surprised you or disappointed you in the results tonight?
What disappoints me about what happened, it's fine. I mean, Arizona voters, I know that they're very strong Republican. It wouldn't be, you know, a change wouldn't happen overnight. But what really kind of scares me in a way is what message this sends, because it's basically stamping the Trump way of being, you know, and these guys are all fans of Trump. Like Ducey showed up at Trump's, at his rally and everything like that. So does that mean that social justice doesn't matter anymore? I mean, like with immigration and stuff like that, that this is the type of politics we're doing now? I mean, that's kind of like the question I have after tonight. But no real like surprises.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's with the House flipping blue on the federal level. Do we expect what do we expect in January with at least democratically controlled Congress, one chamber, a House?
Expect subpoenas, and I think it depending on how the Mueller investigation comes down, you could see impeachment hearings as well. I mean, that's a possibility too. So I mean, it's going to change things a lot in Congress. It's impactful.
It's gridlock. I mean, it's like what happens when the Congress flipped in Obama's midterm. It pretty much creates a gridlock. You know, you have one house doing one thing and the other body doing another thing, and not a lot of legislation gets through.
Which is not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not always a bad thing.
At this stage, it's really not. It's a check and balance.
That's exactly right, and it's the way. It's probably the only way you can force people to work together. But we'll see if that has happened, and I don't expect that to happen. Not initially, anyway, because there's always a sense of, okay, now it's our turn to get even with you guys, and so I would expect a little bit of that.
And we could see gridlock in the state legislature as well, in the same sort of necessary compromise. If those results
we have to watch those two Senate races tonight. Kate Brophy-McGee's seat in District 28 and Sylvia Allen's seat in District 6 up in northeastern Arizona. If the Democrats can pick off those two seats, then you would have a 15-15 tie, which gives the Democrats a seat at the table. But, you know.
And as Bob pointed out, a possibly narrower lead in the House, which again leads to
narrower lead, but the Republicans will still have that majority.
Right, right. We will call it a wrap for now. Stay with AZ Central, which, have I mentioned that our coverage is free, that the paywall has been lifted for the next few days till all these results are sorted out. We hope you also look around at the rest of the site at the great dining and movies and sports. How did the Suns do, by the way? Did the Sun Devils win their first game? We have great sports coverage and news coverage on anything that's not politics. So hopefully you stick with AZ Central and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. If you are a subscriber, we really all thank you very much. Look for the paper on your driveway tomorrow morning and stick with AZ Central for the latest election results. That's all. We're going to go get what's left of the pizza. Thank you and good night.
Because they've just exploded. Charter schools have about 16% of the state's population for kids. They get about 27% of the state education funding. They play by a completely different set of rules. They may go out and hire private companies to run their schools, and a lot of times those private companies are the same people who founded the schools. Basis does have great academic scores here in Arizona, but they also spend their money in a very interesting way. The founders set up another company which also is named Basis, and they get a pretty big chunk of money, multi-millions of dollars of tax dollars that go to this company. Another way that charter operators make money is building their own schools, American Leadership Academy. Their founder, Glenn Way, founded the schools, recruited kids to those schools, and grew it so much, he started building his own schools for his campuses. We calculate he made over $30 million on selling schools back to his own charter schools. He said the profits were closer to 18 million. Parents clearly during the last several years have made a choice to take their kids out of district schools and put them in charter schools. It's public money, it's their money, and they should know how that money is being spent.
I'm a reporter and columnist for azcentral.com and the Arizona Republic. I'm also the mother of a teenager, a book lover, a 2-time ASU graduate, a theater set painter, a tap dancer, and someone who has called Arizona home for nearly 4 decades. I've worked for newspapers for more than 30 years. Sometimes I write about my own victories and stumbles. Other times, I write about the lives of people you might never have met. Because I've learned that words have the power to change things for the better. I write to move you, to reflect, to care, to understand, to take action. I write so you will see what makes us more alike than different.